Well, President Cyril Ramaphosa has called for a new social compact to grow the economy. The National Command Council has been criticized for some of the lockdown regulations, with the socio-economic impact hitting communities in different ways. In the health sector, unions have protested against the lack of personal protective wear, while in education, the department, unions and parents have all been at loggerheads about the reopening of schools. So is a social compact between the state, labour, business, civil society realistic to move the country forward? Let's unpack this now. We're joined on the line by Xolelwa Kashe-Katiya. She is a project manager at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection. Thanks very much for your time this morning, Xolelwa. I think really the cracks are starting to show in the existing social compact, perhaps especially over the past couple of weeks as the lockdown was extended.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. Yes, as much as it looks like our fractures are starting to reveal themselves, which is expected, especially during a time of crisis, there is potential, though, for a social compacting, because at times it would take a crisis for a meaningful compact to be forged. However, to bring business, civil society and government together requires strong leadership. And from our work that we've done when we were developing the Indula Meter scenarios, we found that leadership is one of the key drivers of compacting that could ideally lead to increased social cohesion in the country. However, with leadership being still a challenge in our country, then we're not finding opportunities for compacting. For example, we tend to look to the state for leadership. We're very critical of the type of leadership that is being demonstrated there. I mean, capacity has been raised, ethical leadership issues have been raised. However, it's not the state alone, as you correctly said, that for a compact to be forged, labor is required. So strong leadership is required of labor. Business. So in terms of what is going on right now, we don't see a lot of criticism levels towards big business, for example, or even labor. And civil society also has a huge role to play there. And from what we found is that there are also challenges in that space. I mean, you look at churches, you look at the type of events that took place at the beginning of this pandemic, or the lockdown, rather, with the Easter period and even the beginning of Ramadan. So I think all around we need to really rethink leadership in our country.
So outside of the different sectors that are needed for this social compact, I mean, this meaningful compact becomes all the more difficult when you bring it to a country like South Africa, the most unequal society in the world. How is increased social cohesion possible?
And this is precisely what we need to have a conversation about. And we tend to avoid it. Because when we talk about social cohesion, we tend to think about social cohesion as a kumbaya moment where we all get along, where we avoid difficult questions. So we tiptoe around conversations that really divide us. For example, I mean, we've seen incidences where there's racial undertones, there's classist undertones, there's also very loaded statements that are coming up in terms of even just how we approach this, wherein the dominance of certain disciplines is actually being revealed without looking at other ways of knowing. For example, where are the social scientists? I mean, we see scientists, taking the lead, but scientists alone are not going to help us here. So we also need leadership there in the academy. How do we bring together various disciplines? How do we also place value to the social sciences? How do we also valorize indigenous knowledge systems, as loaded as that may be as well? However, there's also other ways of knowing that have increasingly been dismissed as non-knowledge or illogical or unscientific. So it's actually up to all of us in all our different spheres, or spheres of influence rather.
Xolelwa, I think this is true for many of the challenges in South Africa. They were here before COVID-19 arrived. Since COVID-19 arrived here, it's really just made the cracks even bigger that we already had in our country. Just as an example, unemployment. So this social compact was already starting to fray long before COVID-19.
Yes, all these things were there. What this then does, it just speeds up the effect. For example, some of the emergent outcomes that we came up with was the complete erosion of state coffers, and that would be in the period leading up to 2024, with the ANC going to the IMF with cap in hand. However, with this Black Swan event, we've seen the speeding up of that, where now this is something that's happening in 2020, not in 23 or towards the build-up to the national election. So across the spectrum, so all our divisions and all our fractures that are there, now they're being amplified or rather illuminated by this pandemic.
Yeah.
However, we need to find opportunities in that, because there are many opportunities to find a better way of doing things.
And that's just the thing. I mean, if we talk about just last year and the hearings at the state capture inquiry, we heard some damning evidence there. There were so many discussions around why arrests had not yet been made, given the extent of the evidence we've heard there. Now, in the past few weeks, people are saying, more people have been arrested for walking their dogs or going for a walk outside of regulation hours than for state capture.
And that is actually an expression of inequality in our country. There are certain classes that have access to certain platforms, or wherein maybe, especially in the political classes, where we see absolutely no consequences. But as we've already communicated to our scenarios, that is precisely what was supposed to lead us to the IMF, with the complete erosion, because nothing happens, and then there's a recapture of those state institutions. However, COVID-19 happened even before the Zondo Commission could complete its work. So all of that is now, it's speeded up. So what do we do? And by the time we left our work, we already had launched the barometer to determine where we are as a country. And the last results from 2019 said we are in the state of Gwara, which is a state of lawlessness. So can you imagine where we are right now?
Yeah. And
I think when it comes to that, I mean, what worries me is that some of these symptoms of that scenario, where you see the festering wounds, that we have as a nation because of our unresolved past, we see that being illuminated. We see citizens across the spectrum also, the way they experience that. You see abuse of substances. There's increased gender-based violence within that. Now, that is also amplified because we are all in our homes. We've all retreated to our private spaces where these things happen. And you look at the stats, the crime statistics that are emerging. We're not killing each other on the roads or in the bars or shebeens, but rather in our homes.
Yeah. Well, I want to end off our interview, our discussion, on a question that perhaps points to some light at the end of the tunnel. How does government now proceed to get buy-in on the social compact from South Africans?
I think government has done all it can, especially in light of, the lack of capacity that has always existed there. What needs to happen now, because we are all in our households, we need to also think about leadership in our own spaces, because this is about a compact between the state and citizens. So what are you and I doing as citizens while we're in our homes to imagine a compact with the state? Using our societies, using whatever structures we belong to, whether it's labor or our workplaces or our schools and so on. But right now, it's all about individual citizens. How do we then become more active citizens? And that's what a meaningful compact requires.
Yeah, what can each of us do where we are to make a difference? Thanks so much for your time. Xolelwa Kashe-Katiya is a project manager at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, joining us there on the line.